Hello everybody. Today we're going to review for this Unit 3 test. Let's start with the non-calculator portion. Remember, this is 10 multiple choice questions, all of which pertain to the unit circle. So this is 10 multiple choice. We have more than that on this paper, and I'll tell you the differences. You will have to be able to switch from degrees to radians, just like you see here. So remember, it's all about pi. You want pi in the numerator. So we're starting with 160, and we're going to multiply by pi over 180, because you want pi in the numerator. You can cross off the zeros pretty easily, and we're left with 16 pi over 18. And then you're going to have to reduce that. They both reduce by 2, so we get 8 pi over 9, so we're looking at C. Now, for number 2, this is kind of a strange question. Usually on the unit circle, the radius is 1. So now they're telling you that the radius is 3. And all that is taking your answers, that would be your points on the unit circle, and multiplying them by 3. So instead of having 1/2, it would be 3 over 2. That's it. That's why all of these have a 3 in the numerator. It's no tricks, nothing like that at all. 240 degrees means that we are here. And you can tell that they're both negative. The tangent's positive. This is also a 60-degree angle, which is, of course, pi over 3. And so you need to know the point for the pi over 3. And pi over 3 is negative 1/2 negative radical 3 over 2. But again, because it's 3, there should be 3's in there. So negative 3 over 2, negative 3 radical 3 over 2. So we're looking at A. The equivalent to the sine of 5 pi over 3, that's like a weirdly worded question. It's basically asking you what is the sine of 5 pi over 3. Sine of 5 pi over 3, we're over here because that's where it belongs. All scholars take calculus, so it's negative. And we know that it's the same as the point we just did, so we're looking for radical 3 over 2. So this one is C. Now for number 4, it's really no different than number 3. You just have to do two things and add them together. So the cosine of 2 pi over 3, that's in the second quadrant. So the cosine is going to be negative there. That's negative 1/2. The sine of pi over 6, that is 1/2. Negative 1/2 plus 1/2 is 0. It's not going to be a difficult arithmetic problem. It really is supposed to be about your knowledge of the unit circle. Is just another way to ask kind of the same question as number 3. You will have one like that. There are no questions like number 5 on the test. That's one of the differences between this and the test. But you should know where the asymptotes for cotangent are. Cotangent starts right at 0. If we 1, 2, 3, 4, if we think about doubling the period to 2 pi and pi, remember we go asymptote 0, asymptote 0, asymptote. So we're looking at 0, pi, 2 pi. So this would be at pi times n. N is another way of saying k. For number 6, they're just asking you for the parts. Of course, the amplitude is 2. So that rules out A and C. For the period, the formula for the period is 2 pi over b. And your b, of course, is 4. So we have 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. So it looks like it's going to be b. Number 7, this is actually on the test a lot. When you're given a graph and you're asked for the equation, there are several right answers. This kind of forces you to pick a correct answer. They are multiple choice. It's on the calculator portion of the quiz as well. So if we take a look at this, I'm going to always try to make it the easiest way, and I see that it starts right at 0 up pi. Oops, sorry about that. So I'm going to go with cosine on this one. Plus, if you look at without even looking at the answers, you can see that they're all cosine. But because it starts high, we need it to be the reflection. So we're looking at getting rid of A and B, like right, A and C, sorry, right off the top. I don't even know if I can erase that. Oh, of course. Sorry. Not exactly an eraser. Sorry about that. So right now we've got A that we got A that we got rid of, and we have C that we got rid of because it's not going to be a reflection because it starts high. So if we look at the period, sorry, My blobs have me all confused. It looks like it's right about 2.5. So I'm going to have to call that 5 over 2. So we know that the amplitude is going to be max minus min, 1/2 of 2 minus -4. So half of 6. So we know the amplitude is 3. We knew that anyway. Those are the only choices. We also know that it's down 1. If you need to put that line in there, you can see that it's definitely down 1 with an amplitude of 3. It's cosine. Those are all the same. It looks like the period is the only thing that's different between these two, or the b value, I should say. So I'm going to go with 5 pi over 2 instead of calling it 2.5 because there's no decimal. So this is my period equals 2 pi over b. I'm trying to get to b, so 5 pi over 2 equals 2 pi over b. Cross multiply. 4 pi equals 10b. How about 5b? So I'm really bad at erasing. I have to work on that. All right, so sorry, this is supposed to be a 5 pi b. And so now I have to divide both sides by 5 pi. And it looks like we get 4/5. Of course, you have to also throw in the x in there just because that's what makes it the equation. That was a little rougher than it should have been. Sorry about that. That's D. The range of the inverse sine. Yes, yes, yes. You will have questions about the graphs of the inverses. You may have questions about the actual graphs. Is this the inverse sine? Which one of these is the inverse cosine? So don't be surprised when you see them on the multiple choice portion. So just like they were on the embedded assessment, you won't have to draw the graph. You may just have to identify them. You know that sine and tangent, the inverse function, is defined from negative pi over 2 to positive pi over 2. And if you know that, then you'll know this is A. Cosine, of course, is the top half, or 0 to pi. For the value of this, we want sine, this is negative. Pay attention to that. So that means sine is going to be negative in this quadrant because it's positive in this one. So we're going to go down pi over 4, which is B. 8 and 9 are 9 and 10 rather are really the same question. It's just worded a little bit differently. So again, this is kind of how it's different. That's why there's more questions on here than on the test itself. These are kind of the same. Number 12 is also kind of the same question as all these, just worded differently. The solution to this, so basically what angle has a inverse or has an angle of what angle has a tangent of radical 3 over 3. 2 3's means it's going to be pi over 6. Pi over 6, of course, is 30 degrees, so that's A. Inverse cosine, here it is. That's asking you about the domain, the range. We know that the range has to be from -1 to 1, so the range questions are out, and so it looks like the domain questions are what they're asking you. So, of course, domain goes from 0 to pi. We just talked about that. And number 12, again, same as these other questions, inverse cosine. You want this to be negative, and cosine is going to be negative in the second quadrant because you're only allowed to pick these two. Radical 3 over 2 is pi over 6. So this is 6 pi over 6, so it looks like we're looking for 5 pi over 6. That's really and truly, this is very similar to the non-calculator part. And then on the calculator portion, you can see here we are again, you're given a graph and you're asked for the pieces. You're asked for actually all of this stuff, the pieces and of course the equation itself. This is going to come up again later, as you know if you've already done this. On the calculator portion, there are 11 questions, 2 that you have to graph. So you'll have to graph 2. And by graph, I mean like draw it with the amplitude, up, down, left, right, and you know the pattern for sine, cosine, tangent. There's also 6 multiple choice questions in this section. And there are 3 solving equations. So that's how it breaks down. That's how you get the 11 questions. So let's see, for the amplitude on this, we're looking for the midline. And it looks like the midline's right at 0. Now be careful with how this counts. The lines do count by 1, so our amplitude is 2. Period high to high, looks like our period is 1, 2, 3. Those parts are only asked so that you could actually write the equation. This one looks like cosine to me. We already know that the amplitude is 2. It starts high, so we're going to have 2 cosine. We need the period. It looks like, oh, we already know the period, sorry. We know that 3 equals 2 pi over b because we need the b value. Cross multiply. 3b equals 2 pi, divide both sides by 3. And so we get 2 pi over 3 x. It is not negative. I know the answer says it's negative. This is not negative. It's just plain old 2. Number 4, we saw this on the quiz a couple weeks ago. Here it is again. Yes, it's on the test. Here's your angle. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent is 4, hypotenuse is 5. Pythagorean theorem will give you the missing piece, or if you know your triples, it's a 3, 4, 5. X squared plus 16 equals 25, or 5 squared. So we get x squared equals 9, and so we know this missing piece is 3. Cosecant, I'm not so good at cosecant, but I know that the sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so then we know that cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. So the cosecant of the angle is positive, we're in the first quadrant, hypotenuse 5, opposite 3. Remember, you will have your calculator here if these are difficult for you. I hope they're not, because you're going to fail the non-calculator part, but you have your calculator, and if you type these in the calculator, you'll get an answer. But remember, your answer cannot be a decimal, so it will require that you recognize the decimals as a fraction, like 0.707 is radical 2 over 2. Start on the inside here. They're looking for what angle has a tangent of -1. Oh, I'm sorry, what angle has a tangent of +1, that's pi over 4. And now they're asking you to find the cosine of pi over 4. This is radical 2 over 2. Now you can tell the outside word is not an inverse. The outside word is just cosine, so you know your answer is not an angle. Start on the inside. What angle has a sine of 1/2? That's pi over 6. Now we're going to put the tangent on there. Again, not looking for an angle. What is the tangent of pi over 6? Radical 3 over 3. Starting on the inside of this, what angle has a tangent of radical 3? That's pi over 3, and now you throw the sine out there because this is gone and used up. What's the sine of pi over 3? Radical 3 over 2. Now the directions state to state all these pieces, and I really don't know how it is on the test. I don't know that I'm specifically asking for any of these. If it's easier for you to write them all down, then write them all down. Obviously, if you're asked for them, then please also write them down. There are 2 graphs on the test, and this is what I mean by graphs, where you'll have to graph trig functions. So for this one, we know the amplitude is 1. The period is 2 pi over 2 pi. So the period is also 1. The -1 means we're going to the right 1. And, of course, up 3. I like to know all this before I set up my graph. Kind of helps to know if you're going to have to go far to the left, far to the right, whatever. So we know we're up 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's my 1. This is 1/2. Oh, I have to move it to the right 1, so I have to move it that many spaces to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 2. Halfway. It's not a reflection or anything. We're ready to go. We'll just graph the sine curve. Sine is beginning, middle, and end at 0. First it goes up, and then it goes down. So again, above each little hash mark, you should have some sort of point. This is not the graph, though. Now we have to move that entire graph to the right 4 spots. So it's going to end at 2. It's going to be 0 at 3/2, 0 here. It's going to go up here and down here. So I made those dots a little bit bigger. This is, of course, the answer. Number 9, we're doing a cosine, but it is reflected. We do have an amplitude of 1. Period is 2 pi over pi. Oops, sorry, 2 pi over 2. So the period is pi. We are going to reflect this, and it does not move up, but it does move left. Pi over 2. So I'm going to draw my axis kind of more towards Give myself some space on the left. Pi over 2 isn't going to be very far at all, but period is pi. 1, 2, 3, 4, pi. Halfway is pi over 2. So it's going to move 2 spaces to the left. So I'm going to mark that. Amplitude is 1. Make sure you mark that, please, on the y-axis. And now we're going to graph cosine. We do have to flip it over. So cosine is going to start low, end low. Halfway it's high, and then in between there it's at 0. So this is the pre-graph. Now I'm going to move everything 2 points to the left. Each point goes 2 spots to the left. And again, I'm just making these bigger so I can keep track of myself. And that is the cosine curve for that one. Of course, for number 10, we're going to graph cosine again. And then we're going to do the reflection. Now, technically for the amplitude here, there isn't one. But for cosine, we know that the cosine, we're going to have to use a 1 for our amplitude. The period, b is 1, so our period here is 2 pi. And of course, you can see we're moving to the right. Pi over 2. Which I don't think will be very far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 pi. Pi. So this thing is going to move to the right 1 space. You do have to take into account for the cosine, you're going to have to graph up 1 and down 1, so please draw those and label them. I'm just going to move this to the right. We just graphed cosine, so I'm just going to start by moving it. Cosine is going to start high, but doesn't start at 0. It starts to the right, and it's going to end high, again to the right. Halfway, which is right below this spot right here, and then your zeros are at pi and 2 pi. If it helps you to connect this to see it, then do so. That's not something you have to do. But what you do have to draw are the asymptotes, so your zeros become asymptotes. And then your curve heads towards the asymptote, so this one's going to head up this way. That other half heads up. Now the part that's down stays down and turns into what looks like a full parabola pointing down. Number 11 is definitely on the test. I can tell you it's also multiple choice. So this is, the negatives, of course, reflect over the x-axis. And the plus 2 means it's going to move to the left 2. 0 to 2 pi. This means you can use the entire unit circle. There are 2 of these where you're solving for 0 to 2 pi. There's only 3 solving questions, and 2 of them are right here. And you're trying to get the word all by itself. So for this one, we're just going to divide by 2. So now I have the tangent of x equals -1. I think this must be a typo. I think the inverse sign is missing. Sorry about that. You're looking for what angle has a tangent of -1. That would be, where's tangent negative? All scholars take calculus. So the tangent is negative here. We're looking at pi over 4. So this is 4 pi over 4. So it looks like we'll be at 3 pi over 4. And over here would be 7 pi over 4. Now for number 13, you see if cosine squared, you're going to have to take the square root. Add 3. 4 cosine squared x is equal to 3. Divide by 4. So now we have the cosine squared x equals 3/4. Now you have to take the square root. Remember, this should be a unit circle value. If it's not, it's your mistake. So we get plus or minus radical 3 over 2. So we're going to have an answer in each quadrant. The main angle, the reference angle, is pi over 6. So basically you put pi over 6 in each quadrant. Pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, and 11 pi over 6. Because of the plus or minus, there's 4 answers. Numbers 14 and 15, in degrees, there is one question like this. Tangent cubed and tangent squared. This is most likely going to have to be factored. So before you can factor, it has to be set equal to 0. If you don't like the theta, you can switch it to x if you'd rather do that. I'm going to add this to the other side so that it's set equal to 0. Now this is a common factor. It's not 3 terms, just a common factor. So I'm going to take out tangent squared. So tangent squared theta, that leaves me with tangent theta plus radical 3. So it said each factor equal to 0, tangent squared theta equals 0. Well, taking the square root of 0 is not going to matter. So the tangent equals 0. Over here we get the tangent theta plus radical 3 equals 0. So the tangent theta equals negative radical 3. So where does the tangent equal 0? Right, tangent's flat here. So it's going to be 0 and 180 degrees. Not 360. You're not allowed to use 360 due to the way that it is written. Now the radical 3 part, this is pi over 3, which is 60 degrees. And tangent, of course, is negative right here and right here. So 180 minus 60 is 120. And 360 minus 60, 300 degrees. For number 15, we just did this problem on something else very recently. We'll add 1. So 2 sine squared theta equals 1, and then divide by 2. So sine squared theta equals 1/2. Now we're going to take the square root. Remember, when you take the square root, no radical in the bottom, so we'll rationalize it. Also, we get a plus or minus. So we're going to have 4 answers. We're looking at your 45s here. So the answer, of course, 45 degrees, 135 degrees, 225, and 315. There are no questions like this on the test, so none with a decimal. Now there is one question just like 18. It is multiple choice. Again, like I said, it comes up a lot. You can see all of these. Oh no, they give you a choice of cosine or sine. So let's take a look at this. Sorry, I thought they did the same thing as before. I would say that just to keep it easy, it's inverse or flipped over cosine. So I'm going to go with negative cosine. If you pick sine, it should have a left-right movement. And if you look at all the answers, none of these have a plus or minus inside the parentheses. So none of these move left or right. So that means forces you to pick one of the cosine numbers. So it's not going to be those. Now, furthermore, I know that it's flipped over cosine, so I know based on that it has to be choice 2 without much work at all. But I'm going to finish this out just in case that doesn't help you narrow down your choices. Plus, I can tell it's not moved up 1. They made this problem really easy. So I know that it's negative cosine. It looks like your period is 4 with an amplitude of 1. So I know I'd have 1 from my cosine. Period is 4. So 4 equals 2 pi over b. 4b equals 2 pi. And it looks like we get pi over 2. So I'm looking for something that says negative cosine pi over 2x. It does not move left or right. Of course, that gets me to choice 2. That is the whole test. We just went through more questions that are on the test than you will have on your test. So hopefully it's something you can do very quickly. You've really got to know the unit circle, so please brush up on that. Good luck on your test. Bye.